Elizabeth Short didn't just die. She was buried by the very detectives sworn to find her killer. 150 false confessions, a massive cover-up, and the truth hidden for 80 years. You've heard the legend, but you haven't heard the story of a crime scene the police didn't just fail to solve, they failed to investigate.
It's January 15th, 1947. A body is discovered in a vacant Los Angeles lot. And the horrific reality of that morning forever sets the stakes of this case. The victim was completely severed in half. She was entirely drained of all her blood. A chilling, permanent smile was carved right into her face. The brutality was absolute. But what happened next? Honestly, it was even worse. The failure to secure this horrific scene literally changed true crime history.
So, let's dive into this. Who killed Elizabeth Short? We've all asked that question for decades, right? People are absolutely obsessed with this mystery. Countless books have been written, movies have been made. But the real story isn't about the killer. It's about how the investigation made sure he would never be caught. The killer didn't need to be some criminal mastermind. He just needed to let the system destroy itself. For nearly 80 years, the real truth has been hidden. We're talking about a chaotic media contamination, a completely trampled crime scene, crucial physical evidence that just vanished into thin air, viable suspects who were cleared without a proper probe, and deep, dark allegations of systemic LAPD corruption. It was a complete system failure. The tragic reality is that the original investigation was so catastrophically mishandled, justice never stood a chance. Chapter 1: The Discovery.
It all started on a quiet morning. A local mother named Betty Bersinger was out walking, and she thought she saw a discarded mannequin in a vacant lot on South Norton Avenue. The skin was shockingly white. It was terrifying, but it wasn't a mannequin. It was Elizabeth Short. And what investigators found wasn't just a brutal attack, it was a hemicorporectomy. The body was cleanly cut between the second and third lumbar vertebrae. Now, this required extreme surgical precision. Not a single internal organ was damaged. The killer didn't even saw through the bone. And the strangest part of all this, there was zero blood at the scene. She was murdered somewhere else and dumped like garbage in the grass.
So, the crucial point we need to understand is this stark contrast. On one side, you have the killer's calculated, terrifying control, the deliberate Glasgow smile carved into her face, the spotless, bloodless scene, the surgical execution. It was calculated, it was deliberate, it was completely controlled. And on the other side, you have the absolute disaster of the impending police response, a response that would totally obliterate any chance of actually catching this calculating killer. Chapter 2: The Media Circus. This is exactly where the forensic failures began. You see, police radio frequencies were being monitored by the press. Reporters actually beat the LAPD detectives to the crime scene. It's an investigator's absolute nightmare. Just picture the reality that morning. The press trampled all over the physical evidence. They walked right up to the body. They took unsecured photographs of everything before investigators even arrived. The perimeter was entirely contaminated. Every single footstep destroyed a potential clue. Tire tracks were driven over. Footprints were erased. The scene was fundamentally compromised before a single detective pulled out a notepad. Then, the killer decided to taunt them. 9 days later, an envelope arrived at the Los Angeles Examiner. Inside were Elizabeth Short's belongings, her birth certificate, her social security card, an address book. But here's the kicker. They were scrubbed with gasoline. Not a single fingerprint remained. The killer erased his tracks completely. He used the very media that destroyed the crime scene to broadcast his dominance. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew the police were already completely lost. And then came the noise. Over 500 false confessions ultimately overwhelmed the investigators. People literally called in with elaborate, fabricated stories just to get their names in the paper. The police spent thousands of hours chasing absolute ghosts. They interviewed cranks, they followed up on completely baseless chips. Meanwhile, real, viable leads were buried under all that noise. The investigation didn't just fail, it was sabotaged before it began. The media frenzy created an impenetrable smokescreen. Chapter 3: The Prime Suspects. When we dig into the viable suspects, a really dark pattern emerges. Take Dr. George Hodel, for example. He ran a venereal disease clinic, he had high-level surgical training, and he lived incredibly close to the dump site. In 1950, the LAPD actually bugged his home and recorded him saying this: "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now." Just let that sink in for a second.
a prominent doctor with surgical skill, basically taunting the police on a hot mic. He fled to Asia shortly after, yet the district attorney abruptly stopped investigating him. They just dropped it. This is probably the sharpest indictment of the entire system.
But Hodel wasn't the only one who slipped away. There was Leslie Dillon. He was a mortician's assistant who inexplicably knew unreleased details of the crime scene. There was Mark Hansen, the wealthy nightclub owner whose address book was literally mailed to the papers by the killer. And then there were men like Jack Anderson Wilson and Arnold Smith. They were suspects in similar surgical murders in other cities, but they were cleared without any thorough investigation. Every single time a real lead emerged, the investigation inexplicably found a reason to look away. They ignored the terrifyingly obvious connections.
Chapter 4: The Missing Evidence.
Now we have to look at the deeply corrupt 1940s LAPD. The department was rocked by scandals, gangsters, prostitution rings, payoffs, and this case was not immune. This number is staggering: $500. According to crime historians, that was the going rate for corruption back then. Police detective reports, the very documents recommending whether or not to file charges to the district attorney, were literally being bought and sold for $500 a pop. Leads were deliberately buried. The justice system was functioning as a marketplace.
And just consider the massive scale of what vanished.
By the 1960s, the LAPD admitted that virtually all physical evidence in the Black Dahlia case was gone. Suspect interviews? Missing. The wiretap recordings of Dr. Hodel? Erased. The crime scene photographs? Vanished. You don't just misplace the biggest murder file in Los Angeles history. It wasn't careless filing. The institution was completely rigged for a cover-up. This wasn't an unsolved crime scene. It was a sanitized one.
Chapter 5: Justice Denied. Just follow this timeline of institutional failure. The murder occurs in 1947. By 1949, a grand jury probes the completely inept police handling of the case. In 1950, the highly suspicious Hodel investigation is inexplicably dropped. By the 1960s, crucial evidence vanishes from police vaults entirely, and the ripples extend all the way to the present day. In fact, 2026 AI research suggests a suspect named Marvin Margolis might even link the Black Dahlia to the Zodiac killer cases. But because of the LAPD's catastrophic mishandling, we may never definitively know. This murder remains a permanent cold case. We have to look past the sensationalized nickname and the Hollywood myth, because at the center of this tragedy is a 22-year-old woman. The killer didn't need to be a brilliant mastermind to escape. He just needed to rely on a broken, corrupt system to do the rest. Elizabeth Short deserved a real investigation. She never got one.